As a practicing real estate agent and a trainer myself, one of the things that I like to do is to stay on top of the industry and to keep an eye on what's affecting real estate agents and the industry as a whole. And I get asked all the time, well, what should I know? What should I know? What's going on? What's different? And sometimes, or almost always, there is an answer, and it's constantly changing. So right now, as a real estate agent, I think there are 3 things that you should know right now. Number 1, Zillow is your friend. I hear lots of people complain or worry, and certainly there's the battle at the national level with listings and who owns that data and where it should be distributed. But Zillow is way too big, and it has way too many consumers at this point to fight it. So my suggestion is understand how to use Zillow to your advantage. How is TRID going to affect your job? What is it? And what's so important about it, and why does that matter to you as a practicing real estate agent? And third, training is probably more important than ever. And we're going to talk about this is much more than just your required continuing education. First, let's talk about Zillow and why I say Zillow is your friend. As a full disclosure, I'm a real estate broker and trainer. I am not on Zillow. I don't pay for a ton of advertising through Zillow, but I do understand market trends. And I do understand that we should be, as a real estate agent, where the consumers are. Take a look at these statistics. 140 million unique visitors visit Zillow each month. Now, why do you think that is? That's consumers looking for homes. Compare that to Realtor.com that has 31 million unique visitors. Take a look at the disparity. 140 million versus 31 million. I'm sorry, but that's where the consumer is. So if you're fighting and you don't want your information to appear on Zillow, you're missing out on a whole lot of search. So the order on online search, as far as where the consumers are looking for real estate, goes like this. Zillow.com is number 1 by a wide margin. Realtor.com is number 2. Trulia is number 3, which we know Zillow has bought Trulia in principle. Think about that. YahooHomes.com is 4th. And so what I want you to understand is this is where the consumer is looking. So if you're a real estate professional and you want your listings to be marketed and your services to be marketed, I suggest you go where the consumer is. So let's talk about the Zestimate. One of the things I hear from real estate agents all the time is they bang their head against the wall and they just can't stand every time a consumer brings up the Zestimate and what they think their house should be worth and what it's going to sell for. Well, guys, don't fight it. Use that to your advantage because we know you're being asked the question. So what's wrong with the consumer having information? That's okay. You should be armed to be able to explain that information and break it down and analyze it for them. So are you shunning the question about the Zestimate? You need to stop. In fact, what I suggest is when you go to a listing presentation and you're going to sit down with that seller, you should be armed for the Zestimate question already. Don't shun the question, prepare for the question. So how can you use this Zestimate as a real estate professional to help you make money? Well, first, understand the totality of the Zestimate and how it is actually calculated in your market area. It's very important to note that on Zillow's site, they sit there and tell you, full disclosure, where they pull their information from for this estimate, and they tell you on their own site why it's inaccurate and how inaccurate it is on average per market area. You should be armed with that information. Do not be afraid of that discussion. So do your research. Have a well-prepared CMA for that seller and make sure that you can show them this is why they need you as the real estate professional, because you understand values, you understand market trends, and yes, you understand the Zestimate. So have an answer to the Zestimate question prepared in advance. Don't get upset. Don't be annoyed. Know that the consumer is going to want to ask you about that and have an answer ready to go. So embrace the consumer and understand where and why they're getting their information, and they're still looking to have you help them. That's why you're sitting in their living room and you're enjoying that listing presentation. So show that consumer why you're valuable and why you are the expert that they need in their corner. The second thing real estate agents need to know is about TRID and how it's going to affect your job. Certainly by now, you have probably heard of TRID or the new disclosures or the 3-day rule, whatever it may be that's being discussed out there, which is the new settlement and closing rules put out by the CFPB. We'll understand that this is going to affect many residential transactions, specifically those which are finance transactions. And it's going to begin to be enforced by the CFPB on October 3rd, 2015. Originally, it was going to be August 1st. Now it's October 3rd. And what this means is a fundamental change in both the disclosure forms and documentation, but also the timing and the documentation of the closing of a real estate transaction. So why is this important to you as the real estate agent? Well, as one of your main functions being the transaction manager, you're going to need to be right on top of this, understanding when documents are due, what's going to be included in these documents, and be able to help explain and help your client understand these, because that is one of the reasons, amongst many, that they should be bringing you on in their corner as part of the real estate transaction. So 3 things that you should know about TRID. Number 1, new disclosures are going to be used. We're not completely eliminating the HUD-1 settlement form and the good faith estimate, some of these documents that you have seen for years. However, they will substantially be replaced in many finance transactions by new documents known as the loan estimate and the closing disclosure. And it's important to note that these new disclosures are completely different forms. And as a practicing real estate agent, you should familiarize yourself with these forms, know what's included on these forms, and be able to go over those with your client. The 3-day rule is probably one of the biggest requirements and one of the biggest substantial changes coming from TRID and the CFPB's new rules about settlement. As a real estate agent, the simple answer is this: the final closing documents are due to your client, who is the borrower/buyer, 3 days before settlement, which means you're supposed to get the final documents 3 days before you can close this transaction. So that's important for a number of reasons. But one of those is when we say final, it means final. Nothing can change. So if there's anything that needs to be done, amended, changed, negotiated, something last minute, we've all done it, right? The day of walkthrough or even the day of closing, we've tried to get a couple of last minute things done. No longer going to be the case. The final documents will be in your client's hands 3 days before closing. So it's important that you make sure that they understand how this works and understand the timing of the transaction. And then third, transaction management is always a key requirement of the real estate agent. Understand that your license number will be on these final settlement forms. In some states, this may have already been the case, but I can tell you in my home state of Louisiana, it's not. Well, now they will. And so the reason for that is the licensed professionals who are part of a transaction are going to be responsible for what happens in a transaction. Do not let this scare you. Let this make you aware that as a practicing real estate agent, the bar is being raised. And part of it is being raised because of the CFPB's changes. The third and final thing that I want real estate agents to know right now is that training is more important than ever, especially if you want to make money and survive in this highly competitive business. Because it's very important that you understand that training and education should be a principal part of a real estate agent's yearly professional development and personal development as well. For instance, if you're not familiar, the National Association of Realtors put out what they call their Danger Report. And this is a report that basically outlines, based on interviews and research by an independent consulting firm, what the dangers to the real estate agents and the real estate industry as a whole actually are. The number one A1 item on this report deals with the masses of marginal and undertrained agents that are destroying the reputation of the industry. So how do we turn that around? Train yourself, educate yourself, take your business and your profession seriously. Because let's ask a question. What exactly makes you a real estate expert? The answer is not because you have a real estate license. Trust me, as someone that deals in the schooling industry and sees tons of people go through the pre-licensing process and pass that exam, it is a feat and it is hard work, and you should be proud when you make it over that hurdle. But that is not what now makes you an expert. It's the training, it's the professional development that starts from that point forward that makes you an expert. For instance, what makes a doctor a medical expert? What makes a lawyer a legal expert? What makes a CPA your expert on tax? They train themselves, they study, they read, they go to workshops. Because if I have a doctor that's going to specialize, let's say, in the heart, I certainly want to make sure that my heart doctor is staying right on top of modern medicine and new and upcoming research on the heart. So as a real estate agent, you're no different. So don't take this minimum continuing ed and say, that's all I need to do. I suggest you try to double the annual education requirement each year in your state, and then you can destroy the competition because you will actually be an expert. So for instance, in my home state, it's 12 hours of continuing ed. I would strongly suggest agents get a minimum of 24. You're doing twice as much education as your fellow agents, and therefore you might make twice as much money because you have twice as much knowledge and skill. So take classes even if you don't need the credit. Heck, seek out training and education that doesn't have credit attached to it at all, because many times the true core programs and the stuff you really need don't carry that government or that regulatory continuing education credit. So if that's your only guide and that's the only reason you'll take education, you're going to fall behind in this industry. So I'd like to conclude with a quote from a great writer and inspirational speaker named Jim Rohn. You may have heard of him. And this quote says, "Formal education will make you a living, while self-education will make you a fortune." And this quote deals with a lot of different aspects of professional and personal development. But if we relate this to the real estate industry, that means if you go through your pre-license training, the bare minimum required in your home state, you pass the license exam, and you do the bare minimum post-licensing or continuing education, you may be able to make a living. However, those agents that seek higher level training, those agents that actually make themselves, turn themselves, train themselves into experts, they're the ones that make a fortune. They learn how to make a plan, they learn how to become an expert, and they learn how to beat the competition. Because you're not an expert because you say you are. You become an expert by training and learning and studying and putting together a plan that's above and beyond what your limited competition is willing to do. So invest in yourself as a professional and you will make more money and you will defeat the competition. So take that required continuing education and see that as the absolute bare minimum. And I strongly suggest you try to at least double that. And seek out courses that are in what you want, whether they carry education credit or not. The purpose here is if you train yourself, if you learn, if you become an expert, the money will follow. Because if you just think if you sit back and get that license and tell people you're an expert, they are going to poke holes in that theory and you're not going to make as much money as you desire in this industry. So those are 3 things that I think every real estate agent should know right now. My name is Chris Donaldson, and I thank you so much for listening to this podcast. And hopefully you will find much other information that will help you succeed as a real estate agent on my blog. It's simple to follow. It's christalks.donaldsoneducation.com. Again, that's christalks.donaldsoneducation.com.